My name is Craig Picken. I'm an executive recruiter. More than a decade ago, I started my practice for one purpose: to use my experience as a former military aviator, business jet sales executive, and P&L leader to help aviation and aerospace companies and their executives be fast, adaptable, and strategic. I do these podcasts to inspire and inform, but more importantly, they are a focused platform to help business leaders grow. Welcome to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. Welcome back to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. Hey, I'm thrilled to have Brian McCann with me. Brian is out in St. George, Utah, and he is the CEO of a small company called Airborne ECS, the ECS standing for Environmental Control Systems. Airborne ECS is owned by Ram Manufacturing, and Brian, before becoming the CEO of this company, was the COO of Ram, which is the parent. So Airborne ECS was acquired in August or May of 2019, Brian, am I correct there?
Yeah, May 2019, yeah.
May 2019, and so tell it, it's a cool story. I know a little bit about it, but why don't you tell us kind of what you're into here?
Yeah, first, thank you so much for having me today. I love telling the story, and I love the technology that we're developing here. It's been a lot of fun, but yeah. So I was with Ram, and I was approached by the former owner of Airborne about being a contract manufacturer for the company. Aerospace, has this. There's a lot of emphasis on having the right certifications for manufacturing and stuff like that, and so Ram had all that as a mature aerospace company, and Airborne was trying to get it. And so there was the feeling that if Ram manufactured the systems, that it'd be beneficial to both companies. So we looked into that. It wasn't right at the time. This is when the company first formed in 2016. And in 2018, they approached us about investing. So I went to our board. We got approval on an investment. And then from there, we made a play to acquire the majority share of the company. So that was in May of last year.
Gotcha. So tell the Airborne ECS. You're making environmental control systems for a variety of systems, ranging from thermal weapons to aircraft cabins. And what's the diversity of the product mix?
So it really, you could put our systems, you could decouple our system and put it even in a car. I mean, it's just an expensive system. So it's really limited by extreme environments for one, but then also like where size and weight matter, it's perfect because it reduces size and weight so much, and the efficiency, the power draw, it's really a good fit for aerospace applications.
What's the proprietary benefit of the system? What's different with Airborne than another competing system?
It's a good question. So part of the reason why the company was formed is a bunch of engineers recognized that environmental control really had not advanced technologically since the 60s or 70s. So you still had these old, clunky, heavy, loud compressors pushing oil. Your heat exchangers were still plate fin. They weren't smart systems. They didn't have any kind of a software interface, things like that. And so the idea was to look at the system, to look at it, it's just a vapor cycle system, and say, how do we bring that up to speed with today's technology? So are there different ways we could exchange heat? And so, for example, we've put together a microtube heat exchanger design where you basically take 6,000 to 8,000 syringe-sized needles and weld them together and create a heat exchanger with it. So you increase the surface area with these little needles, and you really the cooling capacity goes exponentially the curve goes up exponentially depending on how much surface area you have. So it really provides you with a more efficient way to cool. So that was the first piece of IP that we developed, and then from there we also developed our own compressor, our own smart pump. We have our own PDU, we have our own software interface and infrastructure, like I talked about. So we really took all the 5 or 6 key aspects of the system and just did our own designs. And that's how the company kind of started. The output of that, what that ends up doing for you is our system does 2 to 3 times what a normal system does. So really it's that much more, it produces that much more. than any other system on the market.
So size, weight, a lot of benefits there. Size, 2 to 3 times more efficient. So,
Super.
size, weight. So who's the biggest customers for it right now? Where do you really see it?
So right now we're seeing a lot of action from the tier 1 defense companies. So like Raytheon, Northrop, Lockheed, companies like that. And then also from the space companies, the commercial space companies are interested in it as well. And then commercial aerospace, the aviation side, I think there's going to be some opportunity there too. It's just more competitive there. So the military side, they're looking for any advantage they can get. This gives them quite a bit of advantage.
How much weight you talking about? If you're pulling it out of putting it on a missile system or something, you talking 10 pounds, 20 pounds, 100 pounds?
This is what's really cool. So one of our customers went out to the market and said, hey, we need an environmental control system that is 11 inches in diameter and 18 inches long. And basically the best system they got proposed to them was 18 inches in diameter and about 200 pounds. We hit their 11-inch diameter, 18 inches long, and then our system weighs 120 pounds. So it was 80 pounds less than the next best system. So in aerospace, that's a lot of heads turning. Like, really? Like, how are you getting that much weight savings? But it's just that much lighter.
That's a big benefit when you're starting to pull 80 to 100 pounds out.
Oh yeah.
Of a system.
Just our compressor. I mean, our compressor weighs 20 to 30 pounds. There's some old compressors out there that weigh close to 80 pounds. So you could save 60 pounds just on the compressor, which is pretty crazy.
What's driving? Is it new material? You talked about, kind of the needles. Is it just new design? Is it design? Is it materials? Is it?
It's a good question. It's a little bit of all of that, and then also some modern technology. So when you're looking at, for example, some of these old systems, they didn't have what we have today. And so when you look at the way even data is collected, our system pushes data to the end user, so they can tell if there's a leak, and it'll tell them where the leak is at. For example, traditionalists would just go look at the system and say, hey, where is it leaking oil? Because it has a leak somewhere, and oil is going to be coming out wherever it's leaking. And so when you have a paradigm shift like that, and you have manufacturing processes that are just more efficient, more precision, like we have today, like laser welding, for example, you can just do things they couldn't do back then. So when you combine all of it, I guess the precision engineering, the materials, new technology, all that together, you get more efficient stuff.
So you guys are pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
You're a small company. How many employees?
We're about 25 right now. So we started out with 6 when we moved the company here, and most of it's engineering. So I'd say 85% of it's engineering.
So 25-person company, and you're going to North. What's the benefit? Obviously a lot of challenges. You're going and knocking on Raytheon's door and Northrop Lockheed's door and Northrop Grumman's door, and you're saying, hey, we're just this small company, but we got this really cool product. How's that been received?
It's received initially probably about as you'd expect it to be. I think that when we first talk to these companies, we give them numbers, right? We show them temperature control. We show them the kind of output that we can the heat that we can pull off of their stuff. They don't believe it. We've had there's no way you can do that. We've had big companies tell us it's impossible to do what we're saying we're doing. Mm-hmm. But now that we've been sole sourced on several programs, and so we're starting to go into, we've been through some qualification, we're going into production. And so now it's like in aerospace, it's all about pedigree, right? So once you start getting pedigree, then when they say that, it's like, yeah, well, we're on an aircraft. And they're like, really? Who, where? And depending on what it is, we can either tell them or we can't. But just the fact that we're flying or we're getting on aircraft, that means a lot. So it starts to become, okay, the chicken or the egg, like, do you have pedigree or not? Do we put you on plane, or do you want to, or do we have you come back to us when you are? Now it's like, well, you're already on program. And so that says something about the system.
So it's not like you go to Lockheed Martin though, and you knock on the door of Skunk Works and say,
No.
"Hey, we know somewhere out there you got these cool things that you're probably developing, maybe, but how do you open that door?" I mean,
It's interesting to me because, and it's a testament to our engineering, and also what we're doing. I've really cold called people from those companies on LinkedIn, for example.
mhm.
I've had CEOs call me and say, "Are you guys really doing that? Do you guys really have that kind of efficiency gain?" And so it's a game changer enough, and it's got enough of a magnifying glass on it with hypersonics and electric and
Mhm.
commercial space, all this really high heat generating new technology that's come out,
Right.
and they don't know how to deal with the thermal. It's more heat than they've ever had to deal with. So it's getting up to the executive level where these guys are aware that they have a thermal problem. And so when we say, well, we can do 2 to 3 times more than a conventional system, it does turn some heads.
How many BD guys do you have? I mean, do you have one BD person? Do you outsource? Are you doing it? I mean,
We're
it's a big world out there.
we're kind of all doing it. Last year, we really didn't do any kind of proactive like bush beating. We didn't do anything that would really. We're trying to be strategic, so develop the business, from a strategic perspective. But as far as going out and asking for work, we're not really doing that still. And even then, we won 5 programs last year with no. I mean, these are massive programs, and we won 5 of them last year, and we have 10 or 12 more that we're in serious negotiations on. So for a small company of 25 people, that's a lot to take on without any kind of business development. But you do have to stay strategic. So
Most of your folks are engineers.
uh-huh.
Obviously, who does your manufacturing?
So that's a good point. We're actually doing the integration, but we're not doing the manufacturing. So we've decided, again, strategically, that we're going to find. We own all the papers, so we own the IP, but we've gone to different companies and said, "Hey, manufacture this piece of it for us." We
Mhm.
pretty much do that all over the country. Now, our parent company, RAM, does have full manufacturing capabilities. They've got everything from metal processing to machine shop to all sorts of stuff. So we do tap into that as well. But for the most part, when we build a system, what we're trying to do is have everything delivered to us, and then we're doing the full integration with the software and everything else.
Gotcha. Now, with so we talked about the challenges of being a small company. That, hey, look, you're knocking on some doors and going, "We got this thing," which I think is really cool. Like I'm the ultimate small company here.
Yeah.
Um, what's the benefit? What do you find to be beneficial? I mean, obviously everybody's looking for some small business set asides and things like that. I got to think that helps you in the DoD world, especially.
Yeah.
What do you think? Nimble. What do they like about your smallness?
So there's a couple of things. This is really interesting. Things that we found out. Like we've talked to some of these companies, and they've said, for example, we were talking to one major defense company, and they said, "Hey, we buy this environmental control system from a known competitor of yours, and we pay $1 million a piece for this system, and 50% of them fail. So we have to buy 2 for every one that we need, and the quantity is only like between 15 and 30 a year. So we don't really have the leverage to go out to market and get new technology or anything like that. These bigger companies that sort of swallow up everybody in aerospace, they don't. You're right, absolutely right. As far as being nimble, they don't have that. Their lead times are long. Their quality isn't great. They're not motivated by the same things we are. It's just a whole different ballgame, right? So like our lead time on a brand new system with technology that'll outperform anybody is 40 to 50 weeks. Their lead time is consistently over 100 weeks. So we can get it faster, cheaper, and give you better technology than they can. So there's a lot of things that we're crossing off there. But it's those are the things that matter to our customers. I think they look at us and they think you're small, but then they look at where we're at and who our parent company is. All of our systems are buoyed up by RAM.
Mm-hmm.
RAM's got a great reputation, and is a fairly decent sized company. So that helps us out a lot as well.
How you finding? I got to. I assume and look, say what you're comfortable about here. But I take it that gives you a little bit of pricing power too. When you say, hey, we're half the cost. Small company, bigger, small company. You're like, hey, look, half.
Yeah,
Half.
well, it's
great quality, quicker. We want the same amount as the big guys, and don't worry about the margin. That's not your problem. We're going to give you what you want.
Yeah, it's funny because we couldn't get anybody to really fund development up front. So the company did capital raises and stuff like that to try and get money to build some of this stuff initially. But these big companies didn't want to pay for it. And there probably was a time where we would have taken their money and said, you guys can own the IP because we were struggling. But now it's like, well, we own everything and we're not going to sell it. And it does give you a little bit of power when this has happened actually multiple times, when a big company sends you their designs for their system and says, hey, we aren't even going anywhere else, just design your system inside this space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's happened to us a few times now. Or when you find out that your customer won a major award and they won it because your system allowed them to do more with theirs, and they've told you that without you guys, our system doesn't work. We couldn't find anything else on the market that would manage heat loads the way your system does. And then they win. And so when they come back to you and try and negotiate, it's like, wait a minute, I can read about your award.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys won several $100 million to develop your system. So it is kind of interesting to be in those shoes.
Those are the fun conversations to have.
Yeah.
I know. What about people? Yeah, you're mostly engineering. You're out in St. George,
Mm-hmm.
which is close to Salt Lake City, but not necessarily that close. It's not a huge metropolitan area.
Uh-huh.
Where are you getting your folks? I mean, what's the challenge from an engineering standpoint? Where are you developing them? Young kids, more gray hairs. What's your workforce like?
We're getting a mix for sure, but we've been pretty. So we want to be boundary pushing in everything that we do, and I'll get more into that in a little bit. But our product pushes boundaries, our culture pushes boundaries. The way that we hire engineers. So we decided that we weren't going to be sticklers on whether or not they actually wanted to move to St. George, which for mechanical engineering is sort of abnormal, right? Your employer wants you to put hands on the product that you're designing. And for the most part though, for us, if we go out into industry and we're like, hey, this is a really, amazing thermal engineer that we'd really like to hire. If we tell them you need to move to St. George, those guys can get jobs wherever they want to get jobs at. And so even a little bit more money isn't going to necessarily pull them in. So we've taken the tactic that we've told them, hey, you guys can work from home. You don't need to move here. Most of them have never been here before. You might as well be telling them, come move to Kingman, Arizona. They don't know anything about it. They don't know what it's like here. Now, when they start working for us, even if they're working from home, and they start to see where we live at, it's kind of an awesome place. I mean, it's beautiful. It's super nice. It's close to a lot of stuff. And so they end up liking it, but they wouldn't have got that exposure unless we would have done it that way. So I have probably 7 or 8 senior engineers that don't live here in town. They live all over the place from Hawaii to New Jersey.
How are you recruiting them? I mean, what attracts the best thermal engineers to a small cutting edge company?
Performance does for sure. When you can show them something that is new and proven out, it's pretty attractive. But then also like the culture, like I read a study a while ago that was on brand equity within these major companies, aerospace companies. And so it looked at Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon, and then SpaceX. And the first 3 companies had like a 30% score. They just basically were saying that the engineers like what they're working on, but they have no loyalty to those companies. They'll switch in a second if one of the other ones comes around and offers them more. And that happens a ton in our industry. But at SpaceX, they found over 90% of the engineers had positive brand association with the company and wanted to be there and felt like the mission was more than more than a paycheck. And so when you look at that, you think, well, how did they get there? Well, I've done work with those guys for a long time, with SpaceX for a long time. They have a really clear-cut futuristic vision, but they have this amazing culture, and they go out and they find these engineers that are bought in, that own it. And so we looked at that and said, how do we have that where we're at? I talked to our team, and we basically made lists of people that we'd worked with. All of us had experience in legacy aerospace. And so working at all these major companies. We had Boeing and Pratt and all these different engineers. And so we made lists of engineers that we'd worked with that were just amazing engineers. And then we just went out and started contacting them. And we've had a lot of success in hiring them.
So you're sort of like, hey, look, we're going to go, we know who we've worked with. We know who we like. We know we don't. How do you develop? Here's a question a lot of companies are asking me. When people are all remote and spread out, how do you develop that company culture? And what does that company culture look like?
It's a good question. So I mentioned the 7 or 8 guys who aren't here. The ones that are here, we have a mix of people who have, been in industry for a long time, and then also some younger guys that just came out of school. And we've really just tried to identify what our core values are and who we want to be as a company. And then right from the beginning, when we're interviewing, weight, cultural impact, not just intelligence, not just experience or resume, but also cultural impact. Will this person fit inside of our culture, or will they cause an issue? And we have a few different ways of looking at that, but we talk about it regularly. And part of it is defining who you want to be as a company, and then sort of like those core values, and then making sure that you're true to those principles and not, just getting pushed off of that path because of some other incentive that pops up.
So you've got 25 people there now. You said like probably 20 of them are engineers.
Mm-hmm.
What's turnover? What does turnover look like? Do you have to worry about it very much?
We haven't lost a single person. We're dialed in with, when you have a company this size, now I've worked in situations where you've got lots of employees, and it's almost impossible for the leadership to connect with everybody. Mm-hmm. But where I'm at, like over Christmas, I called every single person and had a meaningful conversation with them just to see where they're at. But I think just those relationships, everybody's bought in on where we want to go. And it's really positive. It's uplifting. We don't micromanage at all. I tell them all the time, like, I don't care if your kid is in a play, you probably should be there. You shouldn't be here. So I try not to put that day-to-day pressure on them so much but this area is your scope of ownership. And at the end of the day, these are the things that we want to have done. And whether you do that at night or during the day or from home, or it doesn't matter so much to me. I think that trust and responsibility has been reciprocated pretty well.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. I mean, you tell people, hey, look, this is on you. If you can get it done in a day, if you can get it all done in a day and take 364 days off, nobody cares. You're meeting your expectations.
Right.
But if it takes you, 365 days, it's on you to work 365 days or ask for help because you're overwhelmed.
Exactly.
And that's something a lot of companies miss. It's they know what they want, but they're not willing to push it down onto the person and give them both the responsibility and the authority to manage their own life.
Well, the thing that I think is interesting is like working with the companies in LA, right? It's like they commoditize people. And so if somebody doesn't work out, they just go out onto the market and find somebody else who can backfill for them. And for us being in Utah, that's one, not an option, but also two, it's a differentiator for us to say, hey, that's not who we are. We're not going to treat you that way. It's a mutual respect. And you're absolutely right. Like we just did 4 systems at once, and it was the first time we built multiple systems of that configuration at one time. And we delivered those on time, but leading up to that, there was 4 or 5 weeks where there's guys here till midnight. And I had somebody ask me, how do you get them to work overtime every day? I'm like, I've never asked them to work overtime once. I don't have to. That's their project. They know when it's due. And as soon as they were done, I said, I don't want to see you guys for 2 weeks. Go be with your wife and your kids, and
Yep. And that's an issue too. You guys are small. A lot of companies go out and they acquire their small competitors because they want the people. Mm-hmm. It's like, we don't necessarily want the company. We don't necessarily want but we want, you see it over in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. We need the engineers. And then what do? They come in and they screw up the culture. They kept all the engineers there, and then they just paid a lot of money for something that turns out to not to be a lot of value.
Which happens all the time.
That's what I'm saying. You see these companies like, hey, we want their tech talent, so we're going to go buy the whole company, and then we're going to come in and we're going to make them work 9 to 5, and we're going to make them do all this stuff, and they got to come into the office and wear suits and ties and all the stuff that people hate, and then they leave because it's a small world for it's a good tech is always in demand, so good engineers are always in demand. Where do you want to take it? Where do you want to take? What's next for Airborne ECS? I mean, it sounds like you're really successful. You got some great business going on, some good contracts.
Yeah.
To stay there and kind of drive the process a little more. Where do you want to take the company? You want to grow it?
It's sort of turned into like there's this really linear idea of growth where it's like success looks like to us is profitability, and obviously that's a component of it for sure. But what we're finding is like we really want to push a little bit on what's become traditional in this market. And what I mean by that is, like I said before, I sort of hinted on this, or hit on this. Our product pushes boundaries, and so we want our company to do the same in every way. So we're actually changing our name. We're going to change it from Airborne ECS to Intergalactic, which was 6 months of working with a brand agency to come up with that. But the point of it, the reason why we all love it is one, it's the name of a Beastie Boys song that we all grew up with. But two, it pushes on things. There's no other company that I know of named Intergalactic, and so it sort of slaps at first, and we want it to. But that aligns with the type of product we have, the type of engineering we have. We're going to build a new building, so we actually purchased some property. We're going to start construction there the latter part of this year. And it's all going to be boundary pushing. So it's all going to be different. And the idea is to move inspiration and innovation back into aerospace and get away from the cost savings part of it is important. I'm not going to say it's not, but it's kind of driven the industry for the last several years, and it's taken away some of the heart.
No, I appreciate that, because now for the rest of the day, my head is going to have that song in it.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Yeah,
so
no.
Appreciate that one.
I promise. When we decided to do it, the first 2 or 3 weeks, that's all I listened to. So
yeah, no, I hear you. But then again, too, it probably represents you a little bit more, because you got airborne, you got space, satellite systems, you've got a whole bunch. What about like, hey, look, there's heat issues and everywhere. I mean, you talk about data centers now, data centers and server farms, and right. Are those guys coming to you as well, or is that a place where you want to go, or is that really not that necessarily that crucial? It's more
it could be. I mean, I think, somebody said to me the other day, why don't you guys like go talk to Tesla? It feels like they could really use your technology. Yeah, they could, but nobody's going to buy a Model S that's $500,000. It's just, it's an expensive technology right now. It's suited for aerospace. I had a meeting with a guy who owns a ice business, an ice plant. Last week, and he's like, this is perfect for me. It's green, it's efficient, but it's got to be affordable. So I think there's a lot of avenues for growth, but initially we're focusing on aviation and space and everything that's going on there, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But we do want to scale it up, and we don't need to make aerospace grade products for everything. We can also have some commercial spinoffs. So
what about the commercial aviation space? 737s, A320s. Are those guys talking to you? I mean, pull a couple 100 pounds. Yeah. You got great environmental control systems.
Right. So yeah, we have talked to some of those guys, and there is interest there. Again, the commercial world more than the military obviously is more focused on dollars, and so even when you go to them and say, hey guys, like, I'm going to save you this much weight, just what does that alone do aggregate savings in your whole fleet of planes? They just don't think like that. They want dollar for dollar comparisons at purchase, and we haven't scaled it up yet to meet some of that stuff. We have had some commercial companies though say we need to continue to look at this because this will be game changing for us. So some of them get it, some of them don't. I fully expect they will though.
What's the, you've got your own IP, it's proprietary. What's the competitive landscape? Are there some people coming up and nipping at your heels? What keeps you guys sharp?
Yeah, there are. We occasionally will see little pieces of things we've developed and look at it. We've been patenting anything we can, or getting in patent pending anyway, anything we can. And then we're also making sure we're smart about that process so that we're not just patenting everything. But So some stuff we just keep under the hood, but yeah, it's right now. I think there's enough barriers. The walls, the moat, I guess the old Warren Buffett moat is big enough to where there's not competitors just running into aerospace. It scares off a lot of. I mean, if you look at us, for example, we fast tracked getting on program, and our company's been around for 5 years. So it's been 5 years of making no money and 5 years of dumping money into IP development. A lot of companies just don't want to deal with that. And like if I look at RAM, it took RAM legitimately 25 years to get pedigree and to get companies to just, and then once you're through those doors, it kind of snowballs, but you have to get there.
Yeah, you talk about talk to a lot of private equity people, and they talk about patient money.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about how much gray hair did that guys give you? How much gray hair did that give you guys, dumping money into this thing, hoping that, hey, we're going to be able to see a return at the end.
Yeah. So when we bought the company, it was basically a couple of weeks from bankruptcy. It was really struggling. We were working with some of the customers, and they really wanted a steady, experienced hand to kind of back it. Mm-hmm. But I had to go to our board and get more money to bail it out. And we knew that it was going to take a lot to smooth things over with suppliers and things like that. It just needed that. It needed that. And so at the same time, my wife was pregnant. She was 9 months pregnant and having a baby. And it was sort of like you're putting your whole career, everything you built on the line to do this thing, right? And so when I asked myself, honestly, will this work out? It was like, even if I put everything I have into it, it's like a 50% shot it doesn't work out. Yep. But the thing that really sold me on it were the engineers. I mean, when I talked to these guys, they were so bought in. I mean, some of them hadn't been paid in months, and they were like, I am 100% committed to this, and they wouldn't go anywhere else. And I was like, I've never seen that kind of commitment in this industry. And so that really attracted me to come on board with it. But there were some gray hairs for sure. There were some sleepless nights for several months.
Yeah. And that, it's a good friend of mine. He founded his own company, and he's really successful now. And when I sent a dinner with him over a napkin, and he's like, this is either going to be $1 billion idea, or it's going to be a total bust. And by then he had a couple $1 million of his own money into it. And I was like, well, I hope it's $1 billion. I mean, it's interesting, but that just tells you the lay of the land and what happens in business these days and the risk people take.
Right. So. Right. You can only, I mean, you can strategize, and you can line things up for yourself, as much as you want, but at some point it does come down to a little bit of luck. And then also performance is the ultimate litmus test. So does your system perform or not? And that was really what I told the guys was, we need to build the system. We need to see if it works. Everything's been theoretical or analytical up to that point. And so when we built it, we invited the military to come in and watch it being tested, and it passed it exactly how it was supposed to. That's when it was like, okay, like you can breathe a little bit, because it's actually a physical product,
That's awesome. So when does the official name change occur?
So we're going through an AS 9100 audit next month. And as soon as that's over, we're going to start the documentation change. And then it'll take us probably a month or two from there. So I'm right now, it's unofficially the end of March is when we're aiming to have it.
I got you. So why don't we do this? Why don't we leave it here, and you come back in a couple of months after the name change, and you tell us how you're all doing, and I want to hear more about the systems you're on, or what you can talk about, kind of success. I love the small business stories. I mean, it's a huge industry. I love the small business stories. So congratulations on all the success so far.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love to. Again, thank you for having me on, and let's plan on it.
So Brian McCann, CEO of Airborne ECS, soon to be Intergalactic, out in St. George, Utah. How do people find you?
They can find me on social media. So it's just under Brian McCann. Also, my email address is Brian_McCann. So BRIAN_MCCANN @airborneecs.com, which is going to be my favorite thing to change. Our new domain name is ig.space, and my new email address is brianm@ig.space. So if you don't get me in the next couple of months, that's a good place to find me.
Cool. I look forward to having you back on.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. hope you enjoyed the latest edition of the Aerospace Executive Podcast. You can reach out to me directly, Craig at northstaresg.com, or check us out at www.northstaresg.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or on YouTube. Just do a search for Aerospace Executive Podcast. Thanks again. I'm Craig Pittman.